Hidbik pas betanu. Someone attached bread to the inside wall of an oven. Still, people bake that way in different places. The rabbis permit him to remove it before he comes to incur the liability of chatas, or did they not permit him to do so?
Because he didn't do the complete malach, he didn't do everything that he was supposed to do to be chayav for chatas.
Let's see. Amar leRavacha bar Abai leRavina. Acha bar Abai said to Ravina, Eichidan. What are the circumstances of the person's sin? What did he do? If you say that he attached the dough inadvertently, and did not realize his mistake until after the dough baked, then whom should the rabbis permit, since the person had no idea that he had done anything wrong by attaching the dough? It will not occur to him to ask the rabbis if it's permitted to remove it. Rather, what are we dealing with? Where he subsequently realized his error before the dough completed baking. Then would he be liable to chatos if the dough bakes? Vatnan, we learned in a Mishnah, Kol chayav v'chatois einun chayovim ad sheted chilosun shugog. All who are liable to chatas offering are not liable unless the commencement of their misdeed was an inadvertence, it was by v'shegeg, an inadvertence. V'seifon shegogo, and the completion of the misdeed was inadvertence. So when is someone liable to chatos? Kol chayov v'chatois. The beginning was b'shegeg, and the end was also done inadvertent. Hence, if one attached dough to an oven, and then before it baked realized his mistake, Shabbos, he would not be liable to a chatas offering for his act, because the end is not shegeg, he knows already.
Does it mean that he didn't know that it was Shabbos, or he didn't know that it was aser to bake?
Either or. Regard shegeg.
Yeah.
Why then did Bibi mention liability to a chatos? Because the rule is that both of them have to be concealed from him, meaning the beginning and the end. Ela b'mezid, rather we are dealing with one who attached the dough to the oven deliberately, and he now regrets his deed and wishes to remove the dough before it completes baking. Thank you. But this too cannot be the case, for if so, koidim shiyovoy lidi suskilo ibale. Or maybe he should have said before he comes to transgress a prohibition, it carries the penalty of stoning. It says in number 8, since the person knew that it was Shabbos and the baking was prohibited, he has transgressed a sin punishable by stoning. Why then does Obibi reference to a chatos? If it's mezid, it's stoning, not chatos. Actually, it is as you suggested above, that we are dealing with a person who attached the dough inadvertently. And as for your question, whom should they have permitted to remove the dough? Since the person has no idea he has done anything wrong, the answer is that they perhaps permitted other people who saw him attach the dough to remove it and save him from liability to a chatos. Says number 9, another person saw the first person attach the dough and comes before us. The other person comes before us to ask if he should himself transgress the relatively lesser rabbinic prohibition against removing dough from an oven wall, so as to save the first person from violating the more severe Torah prohibition of baking. This way, maybe it would be considered baking because each one did one part. One placed the dough on the walls, and the other took the dough off the wall.
But at this point, it would be too late, right? Because if they took the time to go and ask, that means the bread already baked. But if they had just gone and taken it, then maybe they could have stopped it
after the fact. Yeah, one did this, so each one did one part. So, and then what would be the halacha? Are they liable to chatos? They're not liable to chatos. The answer is that they perhaps permitted other people who saw him attach the dough to remove it and save him from liability to a chatos. So Matkiv Rav Sheish has challenged this explanation. Is it even possible to say such a thing? Tell someone sin, transgress, in order that your fellow may gain? Certainly not. How then can we consider instructing another person to remove the dough to save the first person from Shabbos desecration? The Gemara returns to an answer offered earlier. Elam Ravashi Lo'ilom b'mezid. In fact, we are dealing with a person who attached the dough deliberately. B'mezid again. Ve'ema kodim she'av l'dei suskil. As for you, a refutation from a Bivi's language, say a man his quarry to read, did they permit him to remove the bread before he comes to a prohibition that carries the penalty of stoning? Rav Acha the Rav Masna B'Edya, Rav Acha, the son of Rava, taught an alternative version. Amar Bivi Bar Abaye, Bar Abaye said, "Eat b'pas betanu." If one attached bread to the wall of an oven, so they permitted him to remove it before it comes to the prohibition that carries the penalty of stoning. It says in number 12, according to Avacha's version, Rav Bibi in fact mentioned subjectivity to stoning in his statement, not liability to a chatas offering. Additionally, Avacha taught Rav Bibi's statement as a conclusive ruling, not as a question. Not they permit him question mark, but they permitted him, period. So they told him that in this, seemingly from what we see over here, that someone that placed a dough in this wall oven, they permitted him to remove it before it comes to skila, which means they permitted to remove it before it's baked right away.
So you have like 18 minutes, right? Like matzah?
Maybe faster, I don't know. Maybe it's baked in 5 minutes, but within those 5 minutes he has to remove it quickly, so he's not coming to the issue of stone. Permit him to remove it kodim she'over the issue of skila, before he comes to the prohibition, carries the penalty of skila.
I think I learned before that baking means that a crust forms. In other words, the isa is just a dough, right? But when a crust forms on the outside and on the bottom, that's considered to be baked, if I'm correct.
Yeah. So the Gemara says, Posha Teoni is Yoda, going back to the first ruling of the Mishnah, if the poor man extended his hand into the private domain and placed an object into the householder's hand, he is liable. My Chayav, mostly, why is it liable? But to hold a person liable for transferring will require that the lifting and placing down of the object be from and into an area at least 4 by 4 tfochim wide. And this is lacking here because the hand is not 4 by 4. You have big hands, it's still not going to be 4 by 4. 4 by 4 can be like 20 inches on 20 inches. No one has a hand 20 inches on 20 inches.
Right.
So why is it liable? There's no placing. It says, but hold the person liable transferring will require that the lifting and placing down of the object be from an area at least 4 by 4. Why the Mishnah's first case says that the poor man that extended his hand, he is standing in a public domain, extended his hand to a private domain, picked it up, is liable. He took an object from the householder's hand. Why is it liable? Why shouldn't it be liable? Because there's no 4 by 4. The lifting or the placing down was not from a place. There's 4 tfochim by 4 tfochim. Amar Rabbi Amani, who is down of this Mishnah? Rabbi Akiva. It was Rabbi Akiva. So obviously, we see this chai. Why is he liable? Because we follow the opinion of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva said that we do not require an area of 4 by 4 tefachim. Did not. We learned in the Mishnah, if someone throws from private to private, this is the example I mentioned last week, and a public domain lies in between. So imagine 2 balconies, and there's a street in the middle, 2 buildings, there's a street in the middle, and somebody throws from one balcony to another balcony. So there's private domain to private domain, but then there is a Shus Rabbi, there's a public domain in the middle. Rabbi Akiva in this case would hold the thrower liable, and the rabbis would exempt him. Why? What's the opinion of Rabbi Akiva? Rabbi Akiva says, we say that something contained in the airspace of a domain is legally viewed as had come to rest. So in the airspace, it's as if it was resting in the public domain, and then it was transferred to the private again. And the rabbi said that it is not liable because Savre, they hold lamrinan or maintain lamrinan kluta k'mishum chodamia. They maintain that we do not say something contained in the airspace of a domain is legally viewed as if it had come to rest there. That's the basis of their machlekes. The main one, the pshita l'Rabba, is this to say that the Rabba was certain that it is in the matter of whether we say something contained in the airspace of a domain is legally viewed as if it had come to rest there. Pshita l'Rabba, can we say that for Rava it was obvious, or Rava was certain that kluta k'mishuncha, like the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, that if it's in the airspace, it's considered like resting. We say chasoro, and where the object passed within 10 tefachim of the ground, pligi. So maybe they're all certain about kluta k'mishuncha, that if it's contained in the airspace, it's resting. It's considered resting. But the machlokes is within a sort tefachim. What does it mean? Where the object passed within 10 tefachim of the ground. It wasn't very high.
We said before, we learned before,
it was low.
It's above 10 tefachim, and if I didn't make there's no problem. It's only in the look and within.
So it says, they're discussing it now. So Rabba was in doubt about this point. Rabba inquired regarding what case do Rabbi Akiva and the rabbis disagree. They disagree only when there's less, when in a case where the object passed below 10 tefachim from the ground. And they disagree concerning the following. Rabbi Akiva says, if he viewed as he says that something contained in the airspace of a domain is legally viewed as if it had come to rest. The Rabbi says even though it's less than a sort tefachim, we do not say something contained in the airspace domain of airspace of a domain is legally viewed as if it come to rest. Okay, that's really the machlokes. Something flying in the air, less than a sort tefachim, less than 10 tefachim high, is it considered resting or it's not considered resting? In reality, it did not rest. Do I view it as if it rested or not?
So if it passed through, so I have a hard time thinking of that as resting. Because like if you just throw it, the one thing. But another way of throwing it, if it bounced, you could like throw it on the ground and it would bounce off the ground and up into the other place. Then in that moment, there would be a moment of like a split second of
that's
rest.
For sure wouldn't be a doubt because it did come into a public domain. Over here, it's only traveling through a public domain.
Like
just picture two buildings
right
in the middle of Broadway, and one balcony. It's a first floor balcony, and they throw it to another, and the guy in the other building has the same balcony outside, and there's a public domain in the middle. So the balcony of the guy to the right is a private domain. The balcony to the right and the left is also private domain, and I'm throwing it to you. Over here is public domain. So is it considered like the fact that it traveled through public domain? It's considered resting there. According to Rabbi Akiva, it's resting, even though it never touched the floor.
Right.
If it touched the floor, then it's for sure.
So I can think of two possibilities of it resting. One, it's touching the floor, because then the ball or whatever literally comes to stop. But another one is, what about the opposite, right? There used to be like a big volleyball player in Brazil that when he served, he would throw the ball all the way up, and then it would like stop and then come back down to the other court. But it would go like hundreds of feet up, it seemed. So if you throw something all the way up, all of a sudden it comes to a point where it just stops. And then it comes back down again. And for a split second, it actually rested. But if you throw straight, it never stopped. It just kept traveling through.
According to Rabbi Akiva, even that case would be considered resting. Maybe just for the fact that it went through public domain. Could not reach the other private domain without crossing the public domain. So it says, Oy Dilma, Lamana Masor. So, Rabbi Akiva saw but higher than 10 tefachim, divrakul potter. So maybe we can say that if it's above 10 tefachim off the ground, all agree that he is exempt, for the object has never entered the public domain.
That's a silly question. It sounds very, very silly. If a person got on an airplane before Shabbos, and the airplane took off, and it's flying way up in the sky, and the airplane is not going to land because, let's say, until after Shabbos, would it be mutter for a person to do that if he didn't do any more malacha?
No, it's the same thing as entering the taxi before Shabbos. And
what?
It's the same thing as entering the taxi before Shabbos. Taxi travels on Shabbos.
Right, but the person is passive.
Nobody's passive in the car too.
In the taxi also.
But he's saying it's over. It's so high that it's above the rishus. That's what he's trying to say.
When the airplane flies over a country, flies over airspace of a country, he has to have permission. He's traveling in a place.
Right.
What about the weight? You put it in a plane, and the motor has to run.
Right.
It's a silly question.
No, it's just looking at it in the gate to this.
Anyhow, so it says, and all agree that we do not derive the laws of throwing from the laws of handing over. Laws of throwing and the laws of handing over. Or we can say perhaps they disagree in a case where the object passed above 10 tefachim from the ground, without pligi, and they disagree concerning the following. The Rabbi Akiva said, or maintains, that we derive the laws of throwing from the laws of handing over. So to Rabbi Akiva, really, it's nothing to do with kluta kemishun, that it flying in the air, it's as if it's resting. He just says throwing to me is the same as handing over. What difference does it make if I hand it over to you, or you hand it over to me, or I'm throwing it to you and you catching it? For Rabbi Akiva, it's the same thing.
It's like kinetic energy, like you pushed it and then it just keeps going with the energy that you invested in it. So
ultimately, what happened over here? I threw something and you got it, and you received it. But the rabbis separate the cases. Says throwing is one case and handing over is another case. However, in a case where the object was passed below 10 tefachim, maybe we can say that everyone agrees that he's liable, my time, because in such a case everyone agrees a kluta kemishun chodam. We're in a kluta kemishun chodam because we say something contained in the airspace of a domain is legally viewed as if it had come to rest there. So since Rabbi himself was unsure of Rabbi Akiva's reasoning, not sure if his reasoning is because it's considered like it's resting, even though it's in the airspace, or because Rabbi Akiva considers it handing over, not throwing.
What's that, like 3 feet, 4 feet?
Yeah, it's about like the height of the table. From the floor to the height of the table.
It's about 3 feet-ish.
Or if you go like this, let's say you're here and you go like this, this is 2, this is 3, this is 4.
Okay,
about this height. So the Gemara, so since Rabbi himself was unsure of Rabbi Akiva's reasoning, how could he identify Rabbi Akiva as the Tana of our Mishnah? Alokashi. So this is not difficult. After Rabbi posed the question, he resolved it and concluded the soul of Rabbi Akiva Klutik Mishun Chodami. Rabbi Akiva, in fact, maintains it. We say that something contained in the airspace of a domain is legally viewed as if it had come to rest there. The Gemara argues that Rabbi Akiva's opinion can still not be conclusively cited as the basis of our Mishnah's ruling. Remember, this whole question started with who the Mishnah is following. Is it Rabbi Akiva or not? Perhaps it is only the placing down of the object that does not require an area of 4 tefachim. Maybe, what did we say? Why was it problematic to say that the poor man is liable? Because he took it from a place that is not 4 tefachim. He took it from a place is the hand of the householder. That was for sure not 4 by 4. So the Gemara wants to say maybe we don't need that. We don't need it 4 by 4 in the placing. Maybe the uprooting needed to be 4 by 4 or vice versa. Akira, but the lifting of the object does require such an area. To rest it doesn't have to be on 4 by 4, but to uproot, it needs to be 4 by 4. The Gemara accepts this argument and attempts to find another Tana to whom our Mishnah's ruling may be attributed. Elamar Yosef Ha'amani, who is Tana of the Mishnah? Rabbi, it's Rabbi Nossi. Rabbi, hey Rabbi, which ruling of Rabbi indicates that an area of 4 tefachim square is not needed for lifting and placing? Ilema, oh Rabbi, perhaps you will say that it is the following ruling of Rabbi. What's the following ruling? The Tanya Zot Penachal Gabi Ziz Kolshu. If someone threw an object in a public domain and it landed upon small protrusion for 4 amos away. Okay, so you threw something, there's something sticking out of the wall, and the object that you threw landed on this protrusion, on this ziz, like something sticking out of the wall. Rabbi renders him liable, and the rabbi says he's not, he exempt him. Apparently, Rabbi does not require that the placing be an area of 4 tefachim square. This protrusion definitely not 4, so we see that he is liable. So what did he do? Someone threw an object in a public domain, and it landed in a small protrusion 4 arms away. So why is he liable? Also, Rabbi's reasoning there is, as Abai explained, as will be necessary for us to state later on. Here, Rabbi and the rabbis disagree in the case of a tree that is standing in a private domain. Someone has a tree in his backyard, but the branches extend into a public domain.
Happens all the time.
Okay. And you threw an object. You threw the ball. The ball now is hanging by the branches that are over a public domain. And a person standing 4 arms away threw an object which comes to rest a noifer on one of its branches. Call it noifer because I guess it creates shade. The trunk of the tree measures 4 tefachim, while the branches measure less than 4 tefachim. The Rabbi Sovar Amrinas Shdei Noifer Bosarikor. Rabbi maintains that we say that the branches of the tree are accorded to the status of its trunk. So maybe we can say the same thing about our body. The body is 4 tefachim, the hand is not, but the hand is like a branch of the tree that extends.
So it would be considered like 4, right?
Or the protrusion on the house.
Yeah, so let's see. Rabbi maintains that we say that the branches of the tree are accorded the status of its trunk. While the rabbis maintain that we do not say that the branches of the tree are accorded the status of its trunk. According to this interpretation of the Baisa, Rabbi in fact maintains that an area 4 tefachim square is required for liability.
So we're back to like not being him as the right.
Right.
So,
So now he's still high.
so we gotta find another author.
It says in 13, an obvious question presents itself at this point if the entire dispute between the rabbi and the rabbis is whether or not the legal significance of the trunk lends itself to the branch. Why did Abai describe a scenario in which the branch was in one domain while the trunk was in another? Why not simply describe a case in which both the trunk and the branch were in the same domain? Because if it's landing in a Reshus Harabim, what difference does it make? Just say the tree was in Reshus Harabim. The tree was in public domain. You were in a private domain. You threw it onto the tree and you landed in the branch. Why do they describe a case where the tree was in private, the branches were going to the other side? If the dilemma is, if it's considered the Reshus HaYochid or Reshus Harabim, just because it's hovering over a public domain does not make it in public domain. But that's certainly not the dilemma right now, whether it's considered public domain or not. The dilemma is more whether the branches are considered like a trunk or not considered like a trunk. But maybe we're going to see that this dilemma, whether the branches are considered 4 tefachim, even if they are not 4 tefachim, because they follow the trunk, would lead us to whether the branches are in Reshus Harabim or not. Because if we can maybe argue that if the branches are in the public domain, but I consider them 4 tefachim because the trunk is 4 tefachim, then I say that really they're not in public domain.
You're right.
Because I follow the trunk,
Right.
and the trunk is not.
But,
Or I do not follow if I don't follow the trunk, then they're not 4 tefachim, Understand? It goes both ways. If you say you follow the trunk, then you follow the trunk all the way, and it's a shusayochid. It's not, the trunk is in private domain, not in public. But if you say I don't follow the trunk, I ignore the trunk, then you can you can't say that the branch is 4 tfachim because the trunk is 4 tfachim.
Why?
Yeah.
Why you can say the branches that are for tfach?
Because they're not. A branch is not the size of 20 inches. Branch of a tree are usually this size. They're not this
You
size.
can have a big tree.
We're talking
No,
about a
that's
tree that has
regular.
branches that are not
Regular.
4 tfachim.
And I mean,
But
okay.
the
Or
difference.
protrusion that is not 4
Okay.
tfachim.
I'm hearing
Yeah.
You can also have protrusion from a wall that is 4 tfachim, but we're
Right.
talking about a protrusion
I mean,
that is not.
here with the palm trees, you don't, but in New Jersey, those trees are,
Right. Generally, in most cases, the trunk of the tree is 4 tfachim or more, and the branches are not. The branches are coming out
okay.
are not.
So if you hold that, let's say the trunk, it follows the trunk and it lands on the branch, basically what you're saying is it could be considered still private domain because they're following the thing, but it doesn't necessarily. You could still follow the branch and say that it's in public and say since it follows the trunk, now it's 4 and it landed in a public, now you're liable because it actually landed in a liable resting place. But if you don't follow the trunk and you throw it, it's also in public, but you're not liable because it didn't land on a 4 thing, so it never
No, but why to
finished the
begin
problem.
with, he would be liable if you're not following. If you're not saying we following the. If you say you follow the branch, I would ask you 1 second. The branch is the. If you follow the trunk is in private domain.
But the physical place of the
Is in the air. It's not like. You're right. Oh, it's hovering over a public domain, but it's not per se resting in the public domain.
well, if just traveling through and not resting is considered resting, then surely resting in airspace.
There's a debate. Not everyone agrees, and then they say the only time we said that traveling through is considered resting, it's if it's under 10 tfachim, but if it's higher than 10 tfachim, they don't. They both agree that it's not considered resting. So it's not so simple. But the point is over here, right now the question is, why do you describe a case that the tree is standing in private domain, the branch is going into a public domain? Just say the tree is in public domain. You are standing in private, you threw the object and it landed on the branch. We still have to have 4 tfachim, right? We said that the anacha, the place where you're resting it, needs to be 4 by 4, and it's not 4 by 4 because it's standing on a branch.
But if you
Maybe
follow
it's
the
standing
tree,
even on leaves.
but if you follow the trunk and the whole tree is in public, then it landed on a 4 by 4 surface.
But that's the thing. The Gemara over here didn't even discuss yet if we follow the trunk or not in a case of whether it's private domain or public. The only thing they say, we follow the trunk whether it's 4 tfachim, whether the branch is considered 4 tfachim or not. They're still not discussing it because this has to do with. I'm taking it from another Gemara which discusses a case where you have a tree in private domain, branches goes in. You have a tree in, let's say, in Israel, and the branches are growing in Syria, and do I have to give ma'aser from the fruits that are in Syria? Do I follow the trunk or follow the branches? If I follow the trunk is in Israel, so I have to be. Or vice versa, if the trunk is in Syria, so let's see. Let's see. So it says, so Ella Rabbi Zog Rabbi holds him liable, and the rabbis say it's potter. He threw from public domain to a public domain, and private domain was in the middle. This is the opposite case. Okay? From public to public, and private was in the middle. Okay? Someone has let's try to imagine someone owns store in the middle of a Broadway, right? And you threw the object through his store.
You know, on the belt, there's a gas station in the middle. Like if you're going to the OHEL from Brooklyn, there's a gas station in the. Let's say you're on one side of the belt, and then the gas station is in the middle, and somebody's on the other side of the belt.
Parkway. So let's say okay. So here's
You know that place. Yeah.
But in the previous case, it boils down to whether we maintain that the branches of the tree are according to the status of the trunk, while the rabbis maintain that we do not say that the branches of the tree are according to the status of its trunk, and that's why he would be exempted. Would be exempt. Let's say in this case of public to public and private is in the middle. Rabbi holds them liable, and the sages are saying is potter. Maybe seemingly the sages are ignoring the Reshus HaYochid, the private domain. They're saying we threw it from public to public. Rabbi held them liable for 2 chatas offerings. One for taking an object out from a public domain, and one for bringing an object from a public to a private domain.
There's
So
a difference though, right? Because you're only allowed to carry in a private domain. So if you're in a public domain and you pick something up and throw it, that's already an issue, right?
That's how Rabbi sees it. Rabbi says, held them liable for chatos offering, one for taking an object and from a private, an object out from a private to a public domain, and one for bringing an object from a public to private domain. Apparently, Rabbi requires neither the lifting for the placing, the lifting nor the placing down to be from or upon an area 4x4. So now we see that Rabbi would be a good fit for our Mishnah, because in the Mishnah he picked it up from your hand, from the hand of the householder. His hand is not 4x4. But it was said regarding this Braita, Rav and Shmuel both said, Rabbi holds them liable only in a private domain that is roofed. For we say that a house is as though it is full of articles. Which means, it says number 1, to be considered a private domain, an area does not need to be roofed. It is necessary only that it possesses walls. Rav and Shmuel state, however, that in ruling that someone who throws from a public domain to another public domain, though a private domain through a private domain, is liable. Rabbi refers specifically to a private domain that is roofed. This is because an area that is enclosed from all sides, being dark and stuffy, is regarded as though it lacks airspace entirely, but is rather filled with articles until its roof. An object airborne in such an area is thus perceived as resting upon the imaginary articles said to be contained therein. So either you have a physical roof, or you have a roof that is created through the many articles that you have in that storage place, in that rooms. But if the private domain is not roofed, Rabbi would not hold them liable. We have no proof that Rabbi does not require that the lifting and placing be on an area 4 tefachim wide. Continue, God willing, tomorrow.
We don't have the